If you've been watching my videos, or even if you just stumbled upon this channel, you may be wondering, what is my story? Why am I anti-statin? Well, it's a long tale of discovery by me and denial by my doctors, and it didn't come easy. It was to the point where I was actually doubting my sanity. In this video, I'll talk about my early steps in this fight. Stay tuned. Well, I'm going to tell you a story about me in my 50s, but just be aware of my background. I was a college athlete, consider myself pretty healthy. I exercised a lot. Have to admit, my diet wasn't the greatest. I was on the standard American diet for quite some time. So that's the background of where I am. So in my 50s, I started getting a whole bunch of weird conditions that I'd never come across before. One, I had neuropathy in my knees. Went to a specialist. He did some tingly stuff with my legs and everything, and he couldn't find anything. His best guess was it was my exercise regimen, that I was somehow injuring my knees. Well, okay, things happen. Then I started getting TMJ earaches. Those are very severe earaches, and for a while I could put wet heat on it, a wet cloth, heat it up, and that would relieve me of it, but after a while that even stopped working. And what I was told, my dentist's best guess was that I was grinding my teeth from stress, even though he couldn't find any indications of teeth grinding in my mouth. But he made some mouth guard for me, and that actually did help a little while, but after a while that stopped working. It was one that I would wear at night. Then I started getting shortness of breath, just going upstairs. When I was going out hiking, reported it to my doctor. They sent me to a cardiologist who gave me a stress test, and he said, no, we can't find anything. You're just deconditioned. It's interesting that suddenly I had become deconditioned because my exercise regimen hadn't changed, and all of a sudden I had shortness of breath, which is actually a warning sign for something seriously. Could be congestive heart failure. In my 50s, I don't want to hear about that. And I was getting morning queasiness. I woke up, I just feel like perhaps every morning. It would wear off throughout the day, but same thing again the next morning. And once again, my doctor told me, well, it just must be your diet, even though I hadn't changed anything. And yes, I admit I was on the standard American diet, which isn't the healthiest diet, but nothing had changed. But all of a sudden, I was starting to react to my diet apparently this way. I also had trouble sleeping. I just couldn't get a good night's sleep without waking up several times, and I wasn't waking up to go to the can or anything like that. I just was very restless. And, I have had a stressful career. I'm retired now, but I was in the defense industry as an engineer for many years, and that's very stressful. So it was determined that was probably stress. And then I started noticing that I was getting short-term memory loss. Now, my doctor said, it's normal aging. Well, I think short-term memory loss, normal aging, that's when you walk into a room and can't remember why you walked in, or you forget somebody's name or something like that. I was doing things like, I discovered that a document was due in a week, and I scrambled to write this 80-page document, and when I went to submit it, I realized I had written it and submitted it just 2 weeks earlier. That's not normal forgetfulness. That's something seriously wrong with your memory in that case. And I really feared that I actually had early onset dementia coming on. I would leave equipment turned on at work that could be a career ender. I got dressed down by a union guy once who caught me walking away from a machine where I hadn't secured the power on it and everything. And as embarrassing as that was, he saved my career, I think. That would be a career-ending move for me to have left this equipment on if, God forbid, somebody got hurt or the equipment overheated and got damaged. I started getting mental fog and depression. I would walk around in a daze. This goes going beyond the memory problems. I would walk around in a daze, and I couldn't keep track of anything. I just felt like there was something wrong with my thought processes. And the doctor, of course, looked at family history. Is there any bipolar in your family history? Well, between my siblings and my cousins, I counted up 23 of us, and there's one who is diagnosed as having a bipolar disorder. So it's like, oh, it's in your family, and they offered me Valium and stuff like that, and I just said, forget it. I was also losing my temper. I mean, I would get in a rage over the stupidest little things to the point where my coworkers, I mean, people who actually reported to me, I was their manager, but they cared enough that they called me aside and said, "Job's got to be getting to you. We've never seen you behave like this." So this is a picture of a person in their 50s who is falling apart. And, my doctor kept on saying it's all age related. That just was not an acceptable answer to me. Something was wrong. Something was going on. So is there any good health news? Well, yes, there was actually. For the first time in my adult life, my cholesterol was excellent. My total cholesterol was down in the 160 to 180 range. And even though they didn't know about it at the time, I looked back at it, my trigs to HDL ratio was over 4, and my remnant cholesterol was in the 30s, and those are both bad signs, but the total was good. Now, I'd make a lousy mystery writer, because anybody who's watching this right now says, "We know what the problem is, you were on statins." Well, that's great in hindsight, that's kind of obvious, and that's what this series will be about. But when you're living it, and these things come on gradually, it's not like you take a statin and then the next day all these health things show up. It takes a while for these problems to occur. And it occurred over, when I say my 50s, I mean literally from age 50 to 59 for these things to accumulate. Another problem is, each one of these things in isolation, the explanation was feasible. I mean, those are plausible explanations for what was going on. It's possible that you have some sensitivity, you've been eating poorly for years, that's why you're feeling queasy in the morning. You're exercising too much, which is why you got peripheral neuropathy in your knees. You're not exercising enough. That's why you're deconditioned. I mean, I know those contradict each other, but you're being fed these things over time and it's not obvious. So how did I finally make the connection between statins and things I was experiencing? Well, it started out with a bunch of hiking related incidents. First, my son and I went hiking with my dog in the Green Mountains, and that first night, I really felt like garbage, and I remember thinking, maybe I just plain don't like hiking anymore. It just doesn't feel right. So that's one incident. Let's put that aside for a moment. Incident number 2 is my son and I went to hike in the Grand Canyon. It was his graduation present, and I had a horrible time. I felt bad on the plane going over. That's not totally unusual for me. I usually fly fairly well, but I am susceptible to motion sickness on occasion. And the Grand Canyon, it is a desert. It's an unusual condition. It's not an environment I'm used to hiking in. And I started getting signs of all sorts of things. We thought I was getting dehydrated, even though we happened to have a good amount of water. We did run out a couple times, but we found it shortly after that. And I started feeling claustrophobic. Now think about it. You're out on the plateau of the Grand Canyon and you're feeling claustrophobic. That's like the most wide open thing can ever be in. And I was feeling claustrophobic and depressed and feeling like the world was closing in on me. So that's incident number 2. Incident number 3, I got a tick bite. And as a precaution, the doctor put me on doxycycline. And I started getting real depressed again. It was the same feeling I had when I was out hiking. I was so worried, I actually asked the guy in the office next to me, I said, "Gene, keep an eye on me. I don't know what's wrong, but I'm feeling terrible. And I don't see how doxycycline could cause this." I went on the internet, I looked up all the symptoms, and it was just like, there's no way. It could cause upset stomach maybe, but there's no way it should cause depression like this. So 3 incidents. 4th incident. Well, I started to get muscle pain. It felt like somebody had taken butter knives and jabbed them into my thighs. And I was well aware that that is a side effect of statin medications, that you can get muscle pain. It's a common one. It's the one they do tell you about. I wasn't aware of any other side effects, but I was aware of that one. So I decided, well, let's just experiment. I'm going to get off statins for a couple days and just see if the pain goes away. Well, the very next morning, I started feeling that extreme depression, the world closing in on me, and I realized this is the exact same feeling that I had when I was out on the trail hiking in the Green Mountains, when I was hiking in the Grand Canyon, and when I was on the doxycycline. But there's a common thread in all of that. When I go hiking, I didn't bother bringing statins with me. I just say, I can go without it for a week. Well, so in that first incident, I cut off the statins. The second time in the Grand Canyon, I left the statins home. The third time, I didn't want to mix medications, so I just stopped taking the statins. Now, this is all bad ideas. You know, you shouldn't be off of medication without your doctor's okay. But when I did mention it to my doctor later, she said, well, yeah, I wouldn't have thought that was a problem. So in these 3 cases, every time I got off statins, and of course, incident number 4, I took myself off statins to see if the muscle pain would resolve. And that was the first time that it tied cognitive issues and queasiness issues to the statins. Now, it was me getting off them, but I found that I was actually, you know, I would feel bad in the morning. Well, I took the statins in the morning, and by the time they got into my system, it'd clear up during the day, but I was, in a sense, withdrawing from statins every single day. A little bit milder when you're taking them every day, but this is the first time anybody had ever heard, that I talked to, had ever heard of actual withdrawal symptoms. And what had happened was my symptoms were intensifying. So I didn't see how there could be a connection. I didn't have an understanding that cholesterol had anything to do with your mental functions. I remember walking down the hallways at work, all in a depression, and saying, how could this be statins? That just makes no sense to me. That's because I really didn't know too much at the time. So there's where I made the connection. It's a weird connection because it's a withdrawal connection, but it's the first time I understood that there can be a connection between statins and these sort of symptoms. Now, that didn't explain all of them. That's going to come in a later video, and we'll go over that. So one other thing I do want to address, because the doctors threw this out at me. Oh, this is the nocebo effect. And the nocebo effect is undoubtedly real. That means you're actually experiencing side effects because you expect them from a drug. And the way they test this is, I'll do a whole video on that, but they use placebos and they test it. And a lot of the tests, I think, are actually invalid. They're kind of not well-designed tests. But I can accept that there is such a thing as this nocebo effect. I just think it's trotted out by doctors much too easily and much too freely. Because for the nocebo effect to be present, you have to have a preconceived notion of there being adverse effects. I had no idea that this drug, this statin drug, was dangerous. The only thing that anybody had ever told me about was, you know, the muscle pain. And they take your liver function, a liver panel, every 6 months while you're on statins. And, well, they don't explain exactly what that's all about. Maybe it's related to the muscles, but the fact is, statins are messing with the normal functioning of your liver, so that's why they're monitoring that. So I had no idea on this. I was a totally uninformed patient. Like I said, the only one I'd heard about was, the only side effect I'd heard about, adverse effect, was the muscle pain. And I didn't really experience that until kind of the end. So while I haven't tied the statins to all these other symptoms, I'll be doing that in a future video. And in our next video, we're going to take a little side trip and just talk about adverse effects as they pertain to medications in general. So as usual, I'll ask you to please like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you haven't seen my statistics series on statins, then I recommend that you go do that now. Thanks.